All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Morning Sam, Morning Ralph. This is the podcast for restaurant technology professionals. And I'm really excited today because we have a true consultant that's been doing this for a long time. He's a restaurant coach, an entrepreneur, and a former executive at places like Barmetrics and Bacardi and Anheuser-Busch. We have here Matt Rolfe. And here's the thing about Matt. I'll let you speak in a second, Matt. But,
Sure.
you know, the success of most high performing hospitality team really starts at the top. And one of the things that I've learned a little bit about following Matt and looking at his book, I'll be transparent here. I did not fully read the book yet, but I'm gonna.
Yep.
But I love the ideas that it presents. But it all starts at the top in leadership. Matt, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
I'm so psyched to talk about leadership and hospitality. Thanks for
I'm
being
really
here.
Thank you so much for the invite. Obviously, very passionate about the conversation, but happy to share any experience that I have, all the successes, and more importantly, more failures.
Yeah.
Hopefully, to bring some value to the audience.
Well, terrific. Hey, where are you calling me from? Where are we talking?
I am currently in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I have the blinds in my home office pulled, so the light looks good, but it is currently snowing outside. It is freezing out.
Yes.
But I'm in Canada. It'll be frozen for a bit, but we'll warm up here soon and get those patios open.
From your lips to God's ears. I'm Boston here, and we are frozen as per usual.
Yep.
So all is right in the world today on this January day. So, Matt, you transitioned from working with brands like Bacardi and Anheuser-Busch
Mhm.
and to founding a global company focused on restaurant profitability.
Mhm.
So, what's sort of how did you transition from that executive role into being a consultant doing what you're doing today?
Yeah, and I really appreciate the question and reflecting now. I was just doing something this morning that was 20 plus years ago, I think 22 years ago, 25 years ago. But when I worked for Bacardi and transitioned to Labatt. One thing that I learned, Labatt is owned by Anheuser-Busch here. And one thing that I learned is I had all of these partners and clients that had full restaurants that were selling a ton of my beer and we were paying them lots of money and they were going bankrupt. And I didn't understand it. I'm like, how could they be number 1 to 5 district, not territory, but a team of reps, 10 to 12 reps. They're on the top 5 list. And when I go meet with the owner, I always say back then it was usually with a cigarette in one hand and a drink in the other, and met them really with where they were at. Not about
Yeah.
me, but where they were at. They were struggling. And I ended up meeting I became really good friends with one of my partners who owns 6 restaurants. And he had a friend up in Australia that was helping restaurants become more profitable. And he pulled a little bit of the Steve Jobs thing on me, which I didn't know at the time because I hadn't read the book. But he said, "Are you going to sell bubbly water for the rest of your life? Are you going to
Hmm.
sell beer?" And I thought, in my 20s, 24 years old, selling beer was pretty great.
That's right at the top of the list, I'd say.
It was pretty great. But I go back to this heart wrenching story where my number one client closed their bar and I watched him, and this is a little bit more vulnerable, fall into addiction, lose his marriage, and lose his house. That has stuck with me. It still brings emotion to my eyes. 20. It's still a friend. And I couldn't understand that I supported that through bad advice. Again, it served my needs of selling beer, but it didn't serve the client. So there's a company out of Australia. We brought it to North America. We tested it in my partner's locations. He's one of the top restaurateurs I've ever worked to. First 6 months, we put over $800,000 to the bottom line of his restaurants.
Wow.
But what I realized was we were coaching profit, but we're really coaching behavioral change. How do we get a human to do something different to create a different result? So to fast forward, I ended up owning a profit consulting firm that was focused on inventory. Inventory wasn't my passion, people are. So about 9 years ago, we split the companies. There's a team that runs the profit company, highly successful. Up here in Canada, it's called Results Hospitality. And then
Hmm.
I branched off to starting coaching leaders and leadership teams on how to get the leader right. Because if we can get the leader and the team right, if I could put 100 grand at the bottom line of a restaurant, we could have a multiplier impact if I could get the leaders right. So that's a long-winded journey from selling beer to,
Yeah.
sitting across the table from a leader, team, or on a stage. How do I help you be the leader you want to be to serve your restaurant?
Well, yeah. So with that in mind, it seems like one of the key ideas that you're always talking about is this concept of personal development, right?
Yeah.
And how that can unlock so many different things for you as somebody on a team, but also particularly for leaders, where how important is personal development for leaders? I mean,
Mhm.
what's the path that they need? Where do they start, Matt?
Yeah. And I think it just goes back to the opportunity. And somebody positioned a question to me years ago and said, Matt, are you the leader that you need to be in 6 months? And to back up the story, I'm somebody who grew up with a learning disability. My guidance, I failed grade 1 and failed grade 3. I was told in going into grade 9 that I wouldn't graduate high school.
Hmm.
I was told to go find alternative employment, which that was a nice way for a guidance counselor to say at the time. And I've had a lot of friends who took that path, but to go find a trade job. They
Yeah.
actually wanted me to go work for a roofing company. So I really struggled with learning until I found the hospitality industry and somebody put a book in my hand. I hadn't read a book from cover to end until I was 25. But what I realized is all high performing leaders, as I've studied it for 15 years, all the top performing leaders we see on our social feeds and we admire or we read their books or we watch their YouTube content, all of them have an extreme commitment to their own personal development. And it depends. It's unique to what everybody looks like, but when we're learning and growing, we're inspiring ourselves and those around us.
Yeah.
And when I find a leader who's stuck, it's usually because they've got away from serving others and not necessarily focusing slightly on their own development, whatever that
Yeah.
looks.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the best traits of a leader is their ability to, well, of course, I think any leader should be in some ways inspirational. You should look to that person as someone that inspires you to do better, to improve. But I think what I found working with many smart people across my career, it's the way that they delegate.
Mhm.
Um, the there there's kind of like a right way to delegate and a wrong way to delegate, and it's probably different for everybody.
Yep,
Um, but delegation and leadership, can you talk a little bit about that and how re- and put it in the context of restaurants?
sure. Absolutely. We can put it in whether you're selling to the industry directly or you're running a restaurant. So this is what I see it. And often we talk about let's learn how to delegate. I think what we need to do is take a step back and realize why do we behave the way that we do? So one of my biggest challenges when I was running bar metrics or results hospitality was I would hold on to things because I didn't want anybody to fail.
Hmm.
And my energy is high now. You can imagine me at 27 years old. I was either jumping up on a table, motivating people, or to be honest, I was jumping up on a table, holding on to stuff, giving people crap for what they didn't do. And that was just my, at the time, no, I'm not projecting this to anybody else. That was my immaturity as a leader because I didn't know how to delegate. But it
Hmm.
was about me. I got my needs met by fixing fires. I got my needs met by being needed inside the equation to not delegate. So, although I didn't consciously know that I did it, when I worked with my coach, not to get into it today, but there's a dependent and codependent relationship.
Hmm.
It's not just about delegating. We have when you're not letting go, you're getting your own needs met in a certain way. Without you are, whatever that looks like for you. But as leaders, the biggest thing I work on, whether it's a supervisor moving to AGM, GM, or a sales rep moving into a district manager role, at a certain point in your career to advance, you need to let go and inspire and trust in others. That's usually less about them and more about you getting safe. Or how do you create a relationship where you don't feel exposed, but you're also supporting their results and their development. So it's a big conversation, but we often
Yeah.
talk about just do different. But there's some childhood stuff, there's school experiences, there's how our parents raised us that all lead to how we delegate as leaders. But we all want to read the book on delegating. We don't need to get deep. We don't need to go into therapy in this, but we've
Yeah.
got to understand what's motivating your current behavior. And then we've got to anchor it to where do you want to be and how do we change?
Interesting. So,
That's a lot.
as a coach, you really are kind of like the psychiatrist. They're not psychiatrists so much as a psychologist.
Sure.
So, there's a tremendous amount of psychology that's going into this. And I think you kind of alluded to the idea that um, the path is not necessarily, there's no step one, step two, step three. Like those steps may be different for everybody in terms of leadership development.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's when it comes to your own development or viewing yourself as a leader, it really comes in creating gravity to what who do we want to be? What's the relationship we want? What's the balance
Yeah.
we want? So to ask ourselves the questions, and as humans, we're really simple. 80% of us move away from pain, 20% of us move towards pleasure. I move away from pain. My want is to make sure that we cannot make it hurt as much before we change as leaders.
Oh my God, I'm like right there behind you. I'm running towards away from pain like a
Yeah.
crazy person. All right, let's talk about the book a little bit. You Can't Do It Alone.
Yeah.
Awesome title. Nothing could be so true. But what inspired the book for you? I mean, and how would you frame the key takeaways that somebody would get from as a reader?
Yeah, part of it was growing up with that learning disability. I can't really write or spell. So and we started the book before the pandemic. I say that kiddingly, but there's some
Yeah.
truth to it. So part of it, prior to the pandemic, my coach was pushing me to say, "You're getting exposure to all these incredible leaders. Every single leader has patterns. Some patterns work for us, and some patterns don't." He said, "You have the ability to share your experience and exposure to to a larger audience." And I said, "Why me? How could I write a book? Who would read the book?" Everything the publisher said you're going to go through. My want wasn't to sell books. It wasn't a goal to put it on a shelf or go to a
Yeah.
conference and sell 1,000 books. We've done that. That's great. Do the covers ever get broken? It depends. My want was if we could get key messaging to break a book down into simple chapters where you can read it front to cover, just something that relates to you. So hopefully the experiences that I've had or the exposure I've had to the leaders around me, those experiences could help the industry, because there hadn't been at that point, there wasn't a lot of books coming out for our industry. There are some incredible books that have just
Right.
come out. Wogadera's book being legendary, but other great thought leaders that you might have had on your show or will have on your show. But there really was a lack of content and really instructional context when we started that journey.
So you put the book now. The context around this, of course, is the restaurant industry, right? So it's one thing to want to improve as a leader. It's another thing entirely to do it inside the context of one uh, of a really complex machine that is a restaurant. So, who would you say that this book that the concepts that you're putting out there are best for? Are these for restaurant managers? Are these for people that are these owners, investors, the servers? I mean, who should read this book?
It's a great question. How we design the content or any of the coaching materials, we look at it, just as if you're selling to the industry or supporting your guest, we have different avatars. So my
Mm,
core client that I work with is a multi-site restaurant group, usually 5 to 50 locations. A lot of the content in the book is designed to still connect and engage with the hospitality entrepreneur. So how does the senior leader, and it's not necessarily educating them, it's putting tools in their hands to remind them things they know so we can educate the people behind them or the people coming up. The
okay.
next stage is who are the leaders? So whether that be director or general manager, the goal is at a certain point, as we shared earlier, you have to stop doing and you have to start inspiring. But
Okay.
sometimes it's not just our voice that does this. We need tools, processes, along with our consistent communication and voice to create the change. So the idea was owner, and then we have this manager range, and then anybody who's passionate about the industry. Again, we didn't mean to sell books, and not to go much too into it. We've sold thousands of copies of the book, and most of those
Mm,
people, I have no idea where they are, but I love the messages. And it's not about reading all the pages, but what's the one aha that allows you to act differently to get the results you want and deserve? Whether that's the book, mine, content, your content, we want
yeah.
to create change. How do we inspire someone to act different?
Yeah, and that's often that's the hardest part of it all, right? Is to do something different and or rather to change.
Yep.
And so I'd imagine that there's an equation there. There's being a leader and taking care of the demands of others, right?
Mhm.
You're overseeing others. You're in a lot of ways you're responsible for the success of others. How do you take care of yourselves? How are you coaching leaders to take better care of themselves while they're taking better care of their teams?
And I think for me, that was a hard lesson. The book was done, but the pandemic was still thriving. And my phone was ringing every day from leaders that were struggling. And I've always been someone who had some development and working on myself. But I got off a call with one of my largest clients who was really struggling, and he didn't share that type of tone. And it was just back to back for weeks calls. So I hung up the phone, and I'm like, wow, he really had a breakthrough there. As I looked up, and I was living in Calgary, Alberta at the time, I could see the mountains and the snow caps in front of me. It was minus 30 and freezing. But right after, I felt tears roll down my face, and I keeled over on the ground. And something I've never had, I had a full panic attack. And when I step back from that, it's because as a leader, I was at serving everybody else. As a leader, everybody had boundaries with me, but I didn't have boundaries with, I didn't think I deserved to have boundaries with them.
Hmm.
A part of the evolution in that moment was I realized personally and watched all the leaders around me, if we don't fill our own tanks, we can end up empty. We can have great performing. I know restaurant groups that are profitable where the culture is collapsing.
Oh,
So it's not scalable or sustainable as a business model. But I also have people where they're really happy in their roles because they are taking moments. And we don't need dozens of hours a week to take care of ourselves and our development. But if we can't put ourselves first, we number one, we're going to end up empty. Number two, the people that look up to us will mirror and model us. And when
mhm.
they say us, it's all about the work and the result. We end up producing twins of us inside our organizations that also aren't filling their own tanks.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. As a matter of fact, I feel like the granddaddy of that problem right now in the world that we live in is probably a company like Amazon, right? Where there's a tremendous amount of pressure that comes from the top and just wills its way down to the to every single employee, and it can be a very rewarding, but at the same time strenuous and
Yeah.
toxic. I guess at the end of the day, if it's just overbearing.
And
So
I think there's a great lesson there, though, before we go on the Amazon story.
yeah,
I'm not an expert on it, but one, and again, they've got some challenges. But one thing, when you really read into their job ads and their hiring strategy, they tell you now how hard it's going to be to work there. It's
yeah,
not like and the challenge in the restaurant industry, whether it's supplier or operators, we say, we do job ad reviews for our clients. Great place to work, lots of fun, great culture. They all read pretty much the same, but often that's not true. So I'm not voting for Amazon here in any way, shape, or form. One thing I do appreciate in the last couple of years, at least in my limited exposure to the work we've done with them, is they are being a little bit more honest. And it's going to be brutal, but you're going to have skill set to go sell to somebody else when you're done with that.
yeah. I mean, so from my perspective, I I somewhat apologize to Amazon for just throwing their name out there, but the reality is that there are certain aspects of that company, and there are many like them that have this, let's say, purposeful consolidation, a year-end
100%.
consolidate, right? So you're constantly managed. Leaders are always managing people to squeeze out the least performing people,
100%.
right? Right. So you could have a 6% of your employees, you got to manage them out.
And to
Uh,
back you up, that's why I left Anheuser-Busch Labatt. For 3 years in a row, I watched them let go senior leaders 2 weeks before Christmas. Right business decision. The company that bought Labatt and that bought Anheuser-Busch, they're the most profitable. They make more profit than all consumer packaged good companies combined. The
was this
model works.
InBev now, or yeah,
It's actually, yeah. So they make $22 billion in profit last year. So the model works. Culturally, it didn't work for me. I said my friend had to go home to his family and say that he got let go because of a budget line. And I said, although I love the company, I can't. And again, I think they've recovered, and the management that came in, this is old generation.
yeah,
But it just, for me at that age and stage of my career, and I need trust. I lost trust with the company, so I left. Same thing you're saying with Amazon is we're going to make the numbers work before the people. That's kind of old Jack Welch theory that worked. I just don't know how well it works
right,
in today's.
yeah. That sort of 1960s, 70s management style culture it's doesn't really work very well today.
Yeah,
Never mind the millennials, the Gen Zers won't have it.
yeah, 100%.
Um, you brought up one word that is, I think, a crucial element to any leader, or really anybody that you want to have a relationship with, and that's trust.
Mhm.
How are some ways that leaders can gain trust? And whether that be in the context of a restaurant technology company where you're managing a sales team,
Yeah,
or you're in a restaurant and you're a manager and you're working with folks that, let's face it, this might be their first job, this might be their second job, this might
mhm.
be a part-time situation. How do you establish trust?
It's a great question. I actually, in my own I spent about a quarter of my year in my own development. I went to a course, 7 days. It was like 80 hours, and the foundation of it was trust. But below trust is our human need to feel safe.
Yeah,
And what I learned through that program is, although we understand at the top line the need for trust and safety, it's the absolute necessity for our people. So I think the first step is to understand its importance. To not see it through our lens, because what you want as a leader isn't necessarily the age and stage of your sales team. So what do they want to need? My experience, how we earn trust is real, not perfect. Vulnerability, we've been coaching on vulnerability-based leadership for years, and I can't tell you how many people 5 years ago said, "No, not a chance. I'll let you do that work, Matt." Where now the phone rings from the same client, say, "Can you come and do the talk at this year's conference on vulnerability?"
Love
We
it.
need to be real. If we want to build trust, we need to be real. We need to slow down and create connection with our people. So
Yeah.
when we do hundreds of discovery calls with leaders, and what they ask for most is time with whoever, whether that's AGM to GM or GM to regional or regional to VP, moments in time not talking about the operation. And then how you build trust. There's a lot of neuroscience out there. I'm not an expert in it anyway, that we cannot create sustainable change by giving people crap for what they're not doing. Does not work. We can create a spike, but if we want to create sustainable behavioral change, we need to recognize people for the small things they do in the direction of the behavior we want.
So to get that consistency,
Yeah.
consistency, I guess, is absolutely key there, right? Where,
Mhm.
um, I'm sorry, I might have cut off a little bit of your
No,
last
no,
thought.
no,
Okay.
sure.
Well, all right. Then shifting gears there, we gain trust. We do that through various aspects of vulnerability and having more personalized conversations that are not necessarily about the business.
Mhm.
And we try to be more consistent in our actions in the way that, the way it all feels like it kind of comes back to the golden rule on
Sure.
so many levels, right? Treat others the way that you would like to be treated,
Yeah.
ultimately. But Matt, describe for me, let's go to the other direction now and let's talk about the pitfalls.
Yeah.
All right. Bad
Yeah.
leaders that don't develop themselves, that don't have personalized development plans, that are not consistent, that do not have trust. What are the pitfalls that you see of bad leaders? What does it lead to?
I think it leads to turnover. So I think we can look at the complexity of leadership and all this stuff. But when we look at the security of a team, if I look at any high performing team, there is trust, safety, development, candor. So leadership development doesn't mean patting people on the back and giving them ribbons because they came into work. We have to be real and honest. But in order to be real and honest, we have to have trust. Traditionally, what I see with leaders that might be viewed as bad or not great leaders is their stress and anxiety and how they operate is in a fear-based culture because they're protecting themselves. And in many cases, when I meet with these leaders, they're actually protecting their team. It's just not coming across that way. What ends up happening is people quit their leaders, not the tech company, not the
Yeah.
brand, not the restaurant. It's just in my language. We've all heard this, but they quit the direct person that they work for. And once we start losing people, we lose confidence in ourselves. So it's this vicious cycle. But some people have enough strength just to continue to force their way through it. If I could share anything with the audience now, whether you're the best sales driver in the world or you're the best restaurant operator, if you are forcing behavioral change, it's just not sustainable in today's world. I say that with all due respect, and I have a chance to work with. Last year, we worked with over 20,000 leaders. I can
Wow.
tell you, we can no longer do it by force.
Yeah.
And you can do it by force for spurts, but I guarantee it's not sustainable. That's my experience and my opinion. I'm happy to debate that with anyone that wants to, but where we want to go back, if there's a bad leader, why change? What that poor leader has done is worked for them to get to this point today. But if what we
Right.
want to do is we have to rewire the leaders, say, why should they change? Because although they know they're struggling to connect, they know they're not performing, but they know they're getting the job done. It's if we want to create change, we need to go back. Why should that leader change? Because just because they're not a great leader doesn't mean they're not a good manager. Doesn't mean
Right.
they don't have the right skill set. But we have to shift something in their mind to allow them to behave differently because no staff's going to react differently. If we want to change the behaviors, it starts with leadership, not with staff doing different or managers doing different. It starts with leadership.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's let's change gears here a little bit and put that into a technology perspective. I would imagine that, of course, you have books and you
Yep.
have YouTube videos and all sorts of different ways in which you can improve yourself as a leader. But have you found any luck with certain software out there that might be good tools for people to
Yeah.
develop themselves?
I think there's lots of tools that are coming out now, and some of them aren't necessarily new, especially if you're in the tech space.
Hmm.
But how do we improve and optimize communication? So I think
Okay.
from a leader, like we're going to put out a couple videos for social media. Like if you're a leader that isn't using AI technology on your something as simple as Gmail or your Microsoft suite to add value and cut time, you're missing clarity and communication. One thing that we're using now is how do we use AI twins or clones to produce video content and training. There's so many great leaders that aren't comfortable in front of camera, but we can basically, you've seen this off, you've seen all the
Mm,
coming more than I have. I have an app on my phone for a couple $100 that I've got an AI version of me that I put a script in and can put a video that looks exactly like this. I know Microsoft has better options, but this is how
yeah.
common these tools are. But I think the tool is, how does technology support the relationship? Like, or so there's an opportunity for us to communicate better, or what could the compound impact be if you embrace technology to find yourself, whether you sell tech or optimize tech or in the restaurant industry? What would the impact be if you could find yourself 2 or 3 hours a week? If you found 3 hours a week to be more productive and put that into developing your sales team or restaurant team, that's 3 work weeks a year. It's
Wow.
compound impact like compound interest. It is a multiplying effect if we refocus the time. So many leaders are doing things that aren't moving us in the direction of our goals, myself included. How do we optimize time to do what we do best, which is develop and support our people?
I I love it. The words of wisdom. Matt, we're right now. We're at the part of the program where I get to ask you to debunk a myth,
Sure.
to bust a myth, to correct a misconception out there.
Mhm.
Um, I like to call this segment "Hate to Tell You, But."
Yeah.
So, Matt, if you had a "Hate to Tell You, But" moment around leadership,
Yeah.
what would that "Hate to Tell You, But" be?
I think to keep it on theme with what we discussed here today, and I love the organic kind of flow of what we just covered, but in order to take care of others, you must first take care of yourself. You cannot show up charging through the door of your office. You cannot show up working the 8-hour work weeks if you're not taking care of yourself. And I know that we know this. And I'm not telling you to go to the gym 6 days a week. I'm not telling you to eat carnivore diet. I'm not telling you to do all these things that you can do. But if there isn't a conscious effort and focus, because I often work with leaders that at the debunk that they're at the end of their legacy. So they're selling their companies or they're retiring, and the one thing is that their business has their operation, whether it's sales, a tech company, a sales team, a beverage team, or a restaurant team, it's
Yeah.
engulfed their life. So when they start to go back to empty nest or the partner that they no longer know, our work is meant to serve our life if we put everything into work. And again, I work really hard, but how do you take, show me your calendar and I'll show you what your value. If you don't have gym or self care or time in there, I can promise you it'll catch up to you over time. Even though
I
you're
got
thinking
Jim. I got Jim, baby.
that's a huge thing. Like simple things in the calendar.
Eh,
I'm somebody like currently now working. If I don't have things, I got date night with my daughter.
That's cool.
Nothing make me emotional here. It's just something. It is a non-negotiable in my calendar. I
Yeah.
am not booking a flight to talk at a conference if I'm going to miss the connection with my daughter because I missed it. I
No,
learned the hard way.
yeah, that and you learn that the hard way. I'll
Yeah.
tell you what. I mean, back in the day when my kids were smaller, I'd spend 2 nights a week for a couple of years in Detroit at General Motors. I used to work at an ad agency, and like our clients were Cadillac and Chevy, and I'd have to, by law, I'd have to spend a couple of nights a week in Detroit. And I did this for a couple of years because the idea was that you can do anything for a couple of years. Well, guess what? I did. And I think it was great for me from a career development standpoint. But yeah, I'm not getting those. I'm not getting that time back. I'm not getting that time back that I missed with, and that kind of sucks. And I think it's at the end of the day, it's not worth it.
Do
So
you
yeah,
mind
you
if I
have.
hold there though? Like, because I think it's a beautiful coaching moment to say that the one thing as leaders and high performing leaders is we're hard on ourselves. So I can relate to you. I miss some time. I'm also at the end of a divorce with an incredible person, but we focused on our careers and not our relationship.
Hmm,
But I think the side is how do we be generous with ourselves just a little bit longer? Like the side of self, sometimes when I work with leaders, is that self reflection is hard, but we're sharing our experience with others. If one person watching this invests a little bit more time in whatever area works, their dog, their pet, their kids, their
yeah.
family makes one more phone call to a friend, then the power of experiencing sharing so others don't go through as hard as what we did. Because I'm sure you've got great relationship with your kids
Yeah.
as I do. My goal is just if we can share through experiences, people can hear them better, and hopefully we can all go through a little bit less challenge.
Yeah. I think that's a tremendous bit of personal development advice is to make that time. Your calendar really is a reflection, I think, of what do you say, your worth?
Show me your calendar, and I'll show you what you value.
Show you
Um,
what you value. Right.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So one of the things I've seen is the most successful people I've had exposure to, people billionaires. They are saying they at the time I remember sitting with a billionaire, Warren Russell, worked. He was in the White House with Bush Senior and played in the NBA. Incredible person, oil billionaire.
Hmm.
And the one thing is, I was 3 times busier than he was trying to do a startup, and this gentleman's a billionaire, managing his schedule, meeting with a 27-year-old kid, advising him on his career, and his only advice was, "Don't miss it, slow down." He said, "You got all the energy in the town in the world, but you're missing it because your head's down." So he said, "Just the side of," he said, "being busy doesn't necessarily mean being successful." And that was like a punch. Eddie, his last thing he said is, "You're a leader at work, but are you a leader outside of work?" And he said, "I guarantee you're not." He said it in front of 120 other people. My face turned purple, and he meant it from a caring, loving place. We become friends after.
Yeah.
But that was the shake. It was like a Shark Tank like pitch, and
Yeah.
that was the shake I needed to be like, "Hey, head up! It's not about work success; it's about life."
Beautiful. I love it. Let's close there. So for the audience, uh, you know, I'm really looking forward to reading You Can't Do It Alone. Uh, I advise all of you, if you're not already following Matt on LinkedIn, please do so. But Matt, can you just tell the audience where they can find you, where they can learn more about you, and maybe even book some time with you?
Yeah, so the ability to follow on LinkedIn and direct message. We put out free content every single day. We're trying to put video content out so it lands for a different audience, but feel free to message me there. Or you can go to mattrolfe.com and learn more about the coaching and speaking that we do. And we do a lot of work with the restaurant leaders and restaurant groups, but I spend a significant portion of my year working with sales teams. So tech teams, restaurant teams, brands. We did a huge project with Cisco last year, not trying to support how to sell. How do you understand the wants and needs of the operator sitting across from you? So how do we teach a sales rep to understand our product could be great, but if we don't relate to their need or
Yeah.
understand their position, so if there's ever an opportunity to have a conversation around supporting a restaurant or a sales team, especially in 2025, about 40% of my year will actually be spent with sales teams this year. Because naturally, I came from sales. It's my passion. It's what I love.
Hey, man, sales makes the world go round.
Yep.
Speaking of which, listen, if there's any way that popcorn can help you, we'll continue this conversation offline. But thanks so much, man, for being here and sharing a little bit about your story and what we can all do to become better leaders. And we'll continue to listen to you and read you on LinkedIn. So happy January. Stay warm.
Thank you so much. I'll try. I'll do my best. Yep.
All right, brother. Thank you.
Thank you.